G'day everyone, I'm the Gravetender, and welcome to the other side. Today, I'm going to be talking about the fifth entry in what many believe to be one of the best action-adventure franchises of the modern era, a series well known for its blend of humor, stylish combat, and extremely chaotic world-building. If you're looking to slaughter some monsters in a beautifully crafted world, all the while listening to some pretty sick music, then look no further. This is Devil May Cry 5, the Special Edition. Now, I'm not gonna lie, I've never actually played any of the Devil May Cry games before. I've always liked video games with a clear emphasis on fast-paced, close-quarters action, but I've always been drawn more towards God of War and Drakengard rather than this franchise. That's not to say it didn't appeal to me, I guess I just never had any interest in playing any of the previous entries until now. So, this review is coming from someone with no prior knowledge of what to expect from this franchise. Anyway, after I looked up the story of the previous games, I dived right into the fifth game with only one expectation, that I'd get to kill some monsters and look cool while doing it. So hopes went high when I started the prologue facing off against the main boss, only to then get my ass handed to me, leaving me with no option but to run away. This monster is known as Urizen, the Demon King. He has an army of demons at his beck and call, and he's planning to harvest the blood of humans in order to create a mythical fruit that will make him virtually unstoppable. Now it's up to Dante and company to stop Urizen and save the world from his never-ending army of demons. Of course, any hope for a quick resolution is quickly crushed when Dante is taken out right at the beginning of the game, which immediately raises the stakes and leaves you with only his nephew Nero and a mysterious character named V to fight against the Demon King. As the youngest demon slayer among our cast of characters, Nero must come to grips with his own family's intense history and the difficulties he faces due to the clear gap in power between him and his uncle Dante. Meanwhile, V is forced to deal with his own mysterious past and personal weakness as he searches for a way to bring down Urizen before his own body fails him. Each of these characters have their own unique dynamics that add depth to the narrative, which when combined with Dante's own personal drama and his comical personality gives the player the means to both engage in the high-stakes story while also finding moments of levity throughout.
Devil May Cry.
Dante, do you have any idea how many times I've tried to call? Like a zillion! Oh my god, tonight's my birthday party! Yeah, I'm turning 18! Not a little kid!
Yet, it's the simplicity of the game's overarching narrative that allows players to explore the series' long and complex history without it becoming a hindrance towards the story. Even if you've never played any of the games in this series like I have, DMC5 provides you with more than enough material for the main cast to understand their individual stories. While this does result in some of the side characters being left with nothing substantial to do, considering where the narrative is focused, I reckon it's a necessary sacrifice. Regardless, the main story has a natural conclusion to it, one that leaves the door open for a sequel while also concluding the narrative for its characters. Every action the characters take leads somewhere, and any of the flashbacks or time jumps which occur during the game doesn't disrupt the overall flow. In fact, many of them seemingly enhance the experience. The main story is built around a chapter system with you given control over one of the game's main characters. There's a couple of instances where you get to choose between multiple characters, but for the most part you're given control over just one character per chapter. From a gameplay setup, I would have loved to have had more instances where you can switch between characters, but from a story standpoint it doesn't make sense to constantly switch between them. As it is, you're given enough time with each of these characters before these moments that switching between them feels less like a hindrance and more like a test of how well you understand these characters. So from the base game, there are 3 characters you can play as, with an additional 4th included in the special edition. All of them naturally have the same level of health and power throughout the game, so you won't feel restricted because one character can take more damage than the other. Each of these characters have a mixture of close quarters and long-range abilities at their disposal, along with a plethora of special moves that can easily wipe out hordes of enemies. With certain characters favoring different playstyles, while being able to acquire new combat mechanics as you progress, you'll find yourself being tested constantly. The first character you're introduced to is Nero, Dante's nephew who made his debut in Devil May Cry 4. He's not the fastest character, but he's easily one of the most powerful. After losing his arm at the start of the game, Nero can utilize a large number of different prosthetic arms, each one with their own unique abilities. From dealing out lightning damage to shooting lasers or even providing you with health regeneration. Each of these arms offer you a new way to assist yourself in combat, and all arms are equipped with a grappling hook to close the distance between enemies quickly. While his sword comes equipped with a motorcycle handle which, when revved, increases his overall damage output. Nero's fighting style clearly emulates Dante without being a straight copy of him, and thanks to the constant influx of new arms being given to you throughout the story, you'll quickly find yourself settling on a select number of limbs and their particular abilities. Understanding which arms work best and which ones break the easiest is essential to mastering Nero, especially since you'll have to wait until the endgame before you can acquire his super form. By that point though, you have a thorough understanding of his mechanics, so you should be ready for whatever comes your way. The second character you unlock is V, and of all the characters at your disposal, his playstyle is easily the most unique. Since he's physically weak, he can't actually do any of the crazy shit that Nero and Dante casually pull off on a regular basis, so instead he has 3 familiars to do the fighting for him. The idea is to use V's pets to get your enemies down to low health, at which point V can execute them. Failing to do this will result in your enemies regaining health and continuing to fight. So V is the beastmaster of the group, keeping his distance from enemies and only striking when he can. This type of playstyle certainly helps him stand out in the group, but it can be quite frustrating to grasp at first. Your 3 pets consist of a black panther who does melee damage, a bird who shoots lightning and specializes in massive area attacks, and finally a giant who basically destroys everything just by walking around. Much like the other characters' individual weapons, each of them has their own moves and abilities unique to them. However, since they're all alive, if they take too much damage, then they'll be out of action until their physical bodies regenerate. This can take some time, and while they're gone, V will be vulnerable to opponents, so the key to mastering V is understanding each of his pets' strengths and flaws, making sure to give them time to heal whenever you can, and utilizing his gauge meter to boost their strength against tougher opponents. Like Nero, V's powers and resources need to be carefully managed in order to guarantee a successful fight, and being restricted to playing these 2 characters during the first half of the game allows the game to naturally teach the player the importance of this without needing to say anything. Which brings us to our third character, the face of the series, and everyone's favorite wisecracking half-demon, Dante. Out of all the characters in the story, Dante has the most variety in terms of weapons and fighting mechanics. For starters, he has 4 distinct combat styles which you can switch between easily while in combat. Each of these styles provide him with certain benefits depending on what kind of weapons he's using. Swordmaster, for instance, gives him some more moves for his bladed weapons, and later on allows him to summon magic swords from thin air, while Gunsmith increases the damage and fire rate of his long-ranged weaponry. But this is just scratching the surface. Unlike Nero, who is given a wide selection of prosthetic arms to use, but the rest of his arsenal remains the same, or V, who despite having 3 different living weapons to use, can make up for his physical limitations by combining the power of his 3 familiars, Dante is given a wide multitude of different weapons as he progresses throughout the game. From a pair of nunchucks which can become a staff, to a motorcycle which serves as a pair of improvised chainsaws, Dante's arsenal of weapons is extensive, and when you're able to combine his many weapons into one fluid combo, it effectively creates a symphony of destruction that will enable you to easily wipe out your foes. It's this insane level of variety that separates Dante from his compatriots and easily makes him one of the most versatile characters in the whole game. This is best exemplified by his primary weapon, which is a sword. During the campaign, Dante ends up utilizing 3 different swords, with the first 2 serving to help educate the player on Dante's unique fighting mechanics. So by the time you acquire your 3rd and final sword, the game recognizes that you're ready for the endgame, and the most difficult combat encounters so far. With this new blade, you gain access to a new super form and a multitude of new skills. It's a moment that perfectly encapsulates your journey with Dante as he finally achieves balance within himself and is rewarded with a power unlike any other. Yet even after everything he's been through, he's still somehow the silliest character in the whole story, and we all love him for it. Of course, it'd be impossible to do a review about the special edition of DMC5 without talking about its 4th playable character. But if you haven't played the game, then the inclusion of this character would be a major spoiler, so just in case, if you haven't had the chance yet, I'd recommend skipping ahead. With that said, let's talk about Dante's brother Virgil, who made his spectacular return in DMC5 after a long absence from the series' narrative. Much like Dante, he's capable of switching between a multitude of weapons. However, unlike his brother, he only has one available long-range weapon, which takes the form of magical homing swords. Yet what he lacks in a dedicated ranged playstyle, he more than makes up for in his skill and abilities. Furthermore, while he cannot double jump like the others, Virgil is easily the most agile among the 4 characters. He's able to teleport across the battlefield, closing the distance between him and his enemies easily, which, when combined with his insanely fast combos, can allow you to wipe out entire hordes of enemies in a matter of seconds. More than any other character, Virgil is all about dealing damage quickly and not giving the enemy the chance to react, and as his concentration gauge steadily increases, he'll be able to easily overpower his many adversaries. If that doesn't work, then you can easily clear the board by using one of his special moves like the World of V. Of course, due to his more refined style of combat, his moveset is naturally a lot more difficult to master compared to Nero or V. He really serves as a direct opposite of Dante both in-game and in the story. Both require time to master, but while Dante can compensate with his massive arsenal, Virgil requires more precision and dedication to his smaller selection of weaponry. Regardless of which character you end up liking the most, you'll need at least to have an understanding of what they can and can't do if you want to succeed in DMC5, especially on the harder and more complex difficulties where controlling the flow of combat ultimately determines whether you'll make it to the next encounter. Speed is key in most cases, and choosing when to utilize your super forms is an essential step to success. During your first playthrough, you're more likely to use up all your character's energy during the smaller combat encounters, only to end up face to face with a boss at the end of the chapter who you're totally unprepared for. Thankfully, the game developers are wise enough to expect this. So most of the time before a major combat encounter or a boss fight, you'll be able to summon Nico into a shop on wheels. That way you can quickly upgrade your characters and buy some equipment in preparation for the big fight. Of course, I'm not gonna lie, watching this girl drive her van to my location via all these improbable means will always make me laugh. Of course, I'm not going to say that this game doesn't have its faults. It has a very steep learning curve, especially in the late game, where it basically expects you to be the perfect fighter. Despite its clearly refined combat system, I found that the biggest issue in this all relates to its lock-on function. Unlike some games where lock-on is simply used to focus on a particular enemy, in DMC5 the lock-on function in this is pretty much mandatory if you want to pull off any of the bigger combos in the game. As a result, you're forced to focus your attention on one enemy half the time, often obscuring your view to the rest of your enemies while you deal damage to just one person. Furthermore, in order to properly dodge in this, you must remain locked onto your target, which frankly is pretty stupid. The lack of a dedicated dodge button causes more problems in this game than you might realize. Most of the time you're forced to simply jump around, which works for most of the enemies you encounter, but for the bigger demons and especially the late game bosses, jumping around is completely useless for dodging their attacks. I found that I took damage most of the time in this because I simply failed to input the right buttons to dodge in time, or I simply didn't cover enough distance with the dodge move to avoid getting hit. Thankfully, there are certain abilities and gameplay mechanics which can help you gain distance on your enemies in an emergency, but most of them require careful timing or specific conditions in order to properly work. Which isn't exactly ideal in a fast-paced action game like this. Still, with more time devoted to practicing these mechanics, I'm sure that dodging would become more natural, but casual players may find this aspect of the gameplay to be more tedious than it needs to be. With that being said, due to each of these characters possessing an extensive skill set, you'll need to play through the game a multitude of times in order to completely understand each character's fighting style, an idea which is encouraged by the game ranking each chapter you complete. Depending on how little damage you take, the speed in which you kill your enemies, and how often you taunt them will ultimately determine your final score. Ideally, you want to play through an entire chapter taking as little damage as possible while being as stylish as you can so you can get that perfect S rank. But it isn't easy, and you'll find that certain characters are easier to earn style points with than others. Still, with each playthrough, you'll gradually become better at utilizing these characters in combat, which is integral to completing the game on its hardest difficulties and earning a perfect score in each individual chapter. Especially since every increase in difficulty lessens the damage you do and increases the damage output of your enemies, so if you haven't gotten good at dodging by the time you reach Dante Must Die, then you'll learn firsthand why the difficulty is called that. Of course, if you've gotten to that point, then you would have such a thorough understanding of the game mechanics that nothing would be a challenge for you. So you might as well try beating Legendary Dark Knight mode, a unique difficulty setting featured in the special edition which increases the number of enemies in every encounter. If that doesn't work for you, then why not try Turbo mode, which increases the game speed by 20%, perfect for someone who has the eyes of a god. But I digress. These additional modes do well in encouraging the player to challenge themselves without needing to drastically alter the gameplay or restrict your capabilities. Aside from combat, you will engage in the occasional platforming challenge, but these are all pretty straightforward and kind of forgettable to be honest. There are one or two puzzles in this game, but they mostly involve you turning a few switches, which could hardly be considered an actual puzzle. Fact is, Devil May Cry 5 is clearly focused on delivering some hard-hitting combat, and in that case, it succeeds. These short instances of gameplay divergence are simply there to break up the combat and give you some time to relax, or find some collectibles throughout the game world. Outside the main campaign, there is the Bloody Palace, an arena mode that pits the player character against groups of enemies and bosses. With each floor, the difficulty and number of enemies naturally increases until you reach the top and beat the final boss. Aside from bragging rights and a couple trophies, the only real value to this is earning a special taunt upon completion. There is also a collection of challenges hidden throughout the world. Interacting with these secret missions will unlock them permanently in the main menu, so if you can't complete them now, then you will be able to later. Although you are encouraged to do so, since each challenge will give you the means to upgrade your character's health and power, which will be needed especially since you'll be constantly dealing with new enemies, environments, and hazards as you play. All the same, you'll know you're on your way to mastering this game when you hear the music start to heighten and become more refined as you fight, which in turn will only encourage you to fight harder so you can maintain this sick beat. The soundtrack in DMC5 has easily some of the best music in an action game. It has a perfect blend of modern, operatic, and electronic sounds, with individual tracks dedicated to certain characters and lyrics providing players with more depth and personality. It would have been easy for Capcom to have just given us some royalty-free action music and called it a day. But they went to hell and back with this soundtrack. Even the DLC character provided us with one of the best theme songs for a character I've ever heard in a video game. To put it simply, the music is just too good for words. Also, it should go without saying that even on last gen this game was breathtaking. But on the PS5, Devil May Cry 5 truly takes advantage of the next gen hardware, giving us one of the best looking action games in the modern era, and a photo mode which encourages you to pull off some crazy moves against a breathtaking backdrop. The game runs on the RE engine, utilizing photorealistic graphics to bring these stunning characters to life. But with the PS5 it includes both ray tracing and a higher frame rate mode for crisper details. I only wish that we got more varied environments to take advantage of the superb attention to detail, but I found that many of the locations within the choir loft looked the same after a while, and the more urban environments could have used just a little bit more colour. I understand that most of the city we traverse is in ruins, but still you'd think there'd be just a little bit more colour here and there. This isn't really a complaint, it's more of a personal nitpick, so take these comments with a grain of salt. I'm not gonna lie, when I first started playing Devil May Cry 5, I was frustrated with the complex control scheme, and annoyed with how the game's dodge mechanics were set up. But after playing through the game, spending some time in the Bloody Palace, and tackling the harder difficulties, I've begun to see why people like this series so much. It's both challenging for hardcore gamers while providing enough safety nets to keep the casual audience invested. With the music ramping up after every victory and a constant drip feed of new gear and abilities throughout the story, it's all but impossible for the player not to stay invested in this maddening tale, especially since it knows how to balance its dire stakes with a cast of outrageous characters. If you love killing demons while listening to some kick-ass music and indulging in some very intuitive combat mechanics, then Devil May Cry 5 is the right game for you. Anyway, I'm the Grave Tender, and thank you for joining me on the other side. Please consider subscribing, and I hope you all have a nice day.